When we talk about Victorian London, we often think about railways, coal, smoke and overcrowded slums. But there was one very unlikely luxury that shaped the city, and that is silk. Silk literally created neighbourhoods because it generated so much wealth. But when it collapsed, it left a deep and lasting poverty. This is a story about how a luxury global trade and a religious persecution in Europe combined to create one of the most influential and fragile urban economies in British history. For industrialisation, silk was as much as a political and economic asset as it was a fabric. In 17th and 18th centuries, silk symbolised wealth, royal authority, diplomatic power and social status. European courts, of course, consumed vast quantities of silk for clothing, for furnishings and even just ceremonial display. Silk production was slow and labour intensive and often required years of training, and skilled weavers were some of the most valuable across Europe. France, particularly the city of Lyon, dominated the European silk market. Industry was closely regulated, protected by royal policy and embedded in state power, which meant that when France expelled a large population of its skilled Protestant workers, it didn't just have religious implications, it hit the economy hard. In 1685, Louis IX evoked the Edict of Nantes, which granted limited religious tolerance to the Protestants of France. The result was a mass displacement with around 200,000 Huguenot refugees leaving France. Between 40 and 50,000 settled in England. Many were skilled artisans, including skilled weavers, goldsmiths, watchmakers and engravers. England welcomed them for many reasons. Huguenots were Protestant for one, they were very highly skilled. They strengthened England's economy at France's expense. Though London, ever the opportunist, became the primary destination. The Huguenots did not settle randomly, they settled in Spitalfields, Shoreditch, Soho and Southwark. Spitalfields, just east of the city of London, was a very, very important location. It had its advantages. It was close to markets and merchants. It was outside of the city's restrictive guild system. There was cheaper land and fewer regulations with trade. So this allowed skilled refugees to work independently. What they built there still defines the area today. Silk weaving very much depends on the use of light. And as a result, Spitalfields houses were built with tall, narrow facades and large upper floor windows, which meant that workspaces were integrated into homes. Weaving was done by hand loom, which means the process involved entire families. And so domestic life and labour were inseparable. This was a pre-industrial form of live-work housing and permanently shaped the area's urban form. Even today, you could identify a former weaver's home just by looking at the facade. London's silk industry was not factory-based. It relied upon skilled hand-loom weavers, piecework paid by merchant, long hours and family labour. Weavers themselves were neither wealthy elites or unskilled labourers. They occupied a precarious middle ground. Income dependent on fashion trends, trade policy, tariffs and international competition. Parliament frequently intervened with domestic silk production by taxing imports on silk, which was a really early example of economic protectionism. But this protectionism could only delay, not completely get rid of, later changes. By the late 18th and early 19th century, silk production began to collapse. The key causes of this included mechanised production elsewhere, cheaper imports, changing tastes, and reduced trade protection. Spitalfields suffered disproportionately, wages fell sharply, and unemployment rose. Formerly skilled workers were pushed into poverty. By the Victorian era, Spitalfields was not known as a centre of craft, but as a centre of deprivation. The same houses built for skilled artisans became overcrowded tenements, and this caused a mass economic displacement. Social investigators like Henry Mayhew and Charles Booth mapped the poverty in Spitalfields in great detail. They recorded the overcrowding, the irregular work, and the chronic insecurity of people living there. What they failed to capture was that this poverty followed the collapse of a once valuable industry. Spitalfields has actually become a testing ground for Victorian ideas about poverty, but without acknowledging how economic changes created the vulnerability in the first place. Spitalfields did not empty out after the silk industry collapsed. Instead, it absorbed new migrant populations like Irish immigrants, Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe, and later South Asian communities. Each group reused the same infrastructure of dense housing, live-work spaces, and religious buildings. This is why single streets can have so many different layers of the influence of other cultures. And this is where the myth of the model refugee comes in. Victorian Britain often celebrated the Huguenots as ideal refugees: Protestant, skilled, industrious, and assimilatable. possible. The narrative was selective, but it ignored poverty amongst silk workers, labour unrest, and the dependence on state protection. The idea of a deserving migrant is political, and it shaped later attitudes towards migration and people's welfare. Silk obviously no longer dominates London's economy, but you can see it imprinted on the way the city has been built, in its architecture, in its street patterns, and in its social geography. It shows that the East End was not destined to be impoverished. It was just shaped by a luxury economy that collapsed. I really like this story because it shows that places that we take for granted in cities are often the result of things that can be happening thousands and thousands of miles away. Cities are built by cycles of boom and bust, and you can see these imprinted on the city. Migration reshapes urban form, especially in London, and that prosperity can leave vulnerability behind. And that's my story about silk and the East End. If you liked it, give us a like or subscribe for more. I bring out new episodes every Tuesday. Goodbye.